What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more Innerpartysystem from their self-titled album, 2008. Thank you again to Izzy. And the next track, which I believe is the penultimate on the album, is This Town Your Grave. Has a bit of a dire sound to it. Of course, it makes me wonder whether we're talking literally a town and literally a grave. I would be more inclined to think that the first part of it, this town, is literal, and the second part meaning your end, the death of you, even if that's less literal, which is to say some endeavor, some relationship, some personal integrity will be eliminated by the character of this town. The way people will say, if you come to Hollywood looking to make your name, like, oh, this town will be the death of you. So I feel like it might be in that regard, where the town is more of a direct reference and the grave is more figurative in meaning. Of course, it could be the other way around. They both could be figurative. They both could be literal. So, yeah, I don't quite know how to take it, but that would be my hypothesis in advance. And, of course, I have no indication of what town this is, but certain places like LA, like New York, maybe like London, bigger cities, even though a town in a more, let's say, sociological sense is a smaller population area of residents, I feel like it could be, or I would be inclined to think that it might relate to a bigger city. But of course, it could be a small town. Small towns sometimes have, their own characteristics. You can't do anything without everybody knowing. And so if you have vices or things which others will see in negative light, a small town could be more likely to cause your immediate death than a bigger town where you can perhaps live under a greater degree of anonymity. So I'll try to catch what I can, but I feel like there's a lot potentially at play just based on the poetic style title. This is Innerpartysystem. The song is This Town Your Grave, and it's from the 2008 self-titled album.
Face down in a population that God has left behind. In these barren streets, the neon lights will be your guide. All their limbs are stretched, holding tight what could have been. No one here is innocent because we can't forgive. God made this place a haven for the motionless and weak. A paradise
So much to unpack here. This is where my job is difficult because I have to try to keep everything in my brain, and like vocals, lyrics, sonics, progression, themes. But okay, so that part right at the end and that long, edgy, down tempo, minimal interlude where it felt like we were in the middle of an electronic transmission that was maybe having some errors and not being completely faithful in its transmission, meaning like bits were being lost and there were again like errors or malfunctions. It had a very like electromechanical sound, but with errors and sounds that you wouldn't normally hear if everything was flowing smoothly and functioning precisely as intended. And at the end there, it sounded like an electronic piece of equipment that was malfunctioning or had gone awry. So I like that aspect of the sonics, and more generally, and acknowledging the sudden ramping up and intensification of the sonics relative to maybe the first third of the tune before it did that. It sounds like if you took an electronica track, filtered it through a bit of alternative rock, and then added a bit of like Nine Inch Nails industrial type of flavor. Certainly the electronic darkness of the tune came across. More on that in a moment when I try to get to the themes and the lyrics, but the vocals, my god, the vocals. So, a very direct and like middle range, meaning not super soft and, whispered or spoken, but not big and melodic and singing at first. So they were in this sort of middle range, like kind of dark and subtly intense delivery, but then they just launch and they become like screaming, shouting type vocals, which I think were hit really well. Like that type of singing, you can do it well, or you can just do it with a sort of raw intensity. And there's nothing wrong with a raw, intense, shouted type of vocal, but I think they really work here. Like he really had a good articulation of screaming type vocals, and they do seem to fit with the themes as I caught them. So right away, we get reference to like neon lights, which, okay, I'm thinking big city, but maybe a bit like, cyberpunk, a bit like super saturated and run down institutions and physical infrastructure falling apart because of, greed and a hyper capitalist like consumerism and a rot that is both figurative and literal. And so then, talking about like this is a place for those who are emotionally weak and those who, can't maybe, aren't going to make it, and, referencing other people who like they escaped because they could, leaving houses and buildings empty. So again, this sort of like post-apocalyptic type of feel, or at the very least a city that is past its prime in terms of its like dynamic, industrious and vibrant type of atmosphere, and going into again a sort of too late, things have sort of taken a wrong turn and everything is like decaying or becoming dead, even if not literally. But obviously we have a lot of religious framing here, like God created this place because heaven was full. So then I'm thinking something like limbo, something where souls that are not immediately allowed into heaven or condemned to hell, somewhere that they're going where there's a waiting period, and maybe the people here are going to wait indefinitely. But then it seems like there's almost a positive spin on that like, oh, other people, they're up in heaven, or these other people, they left or they couldn't hang here anymore, so we're going to create the future that like will be the future, if only because other people have gone somewhere else or been accepted somewhere else, so we're going to have to make the best of it. But of course a grave is, on a supernatural view, where you go before you get to limbo or to heaven. So then I'm thinking like this town is your grave because you're not going to then take the next step, or you're not going to be allowed to transition into this endless euphoric place or state. So it sounds like there's both positive and negative aspects here. And again, if you're emotionally weak, maybe there's some like moral connotations there. So they're in this decayed limbo place that is not an ideal outcome, but they're going to make the best of it, or at least make it their home. So, like, it being your grave might not be as dire as it sounds, but I feel like there is a negative intensity here, but maybe one that in the end is being embraced and not shied away from. So, yeah, again, like literal, figurative, terrestrial, metaphysical. I feel like there's an intersection of some different layers here, and while I don't quite know what to make of the narrator's attitude, certainly the singing, the shouting intensity suggests that it is intense in some way. So whether they chose to be here, which it doesn't sound like that's the case, but it does sound like they're maybe choosing to not give up or to not just acquiesce in the state of affairs, and they're going to make a future out of this. So yeah, I don't know how it all stitches together, but I'm interested by the lyrical and thematic ingredients. So yeah, a really top track. I like that pulsing bass, which was more notable in a couple of the sections, including that stripped down segment where again there were like, half functioning mechanical type of sounds, and at the end it sort of returned to that, but there was a lot of energy and sort of rocking dynamism in the like bigger parts of the tune. So yeah, just an experience is I guess what I mean to say. This song was a major experience. As I said, I think there's one more, so looking forward to that. Shout out to Issy once again. Let me know what you think, and I will see you next time. Peace.